So, good afternoon. My name is Oskar Melnichuk. I'm the publisher of Arrowsmith Press, and I'd like to thank you so much for coming out this suddenly balmy afternoon. Thank you to Friends Meeting for welcoming us back into this most congenial space. We've been here before to mark the publication of books by George Kovac, Daniel Berrigan, Oksana Lutsishina, Thomas Sayers Ellis, Jason Shinter, and so many others. I'd like to take a moment now also to celebrate a former Arrowsmith affiliate, Mossab Abu Toha, who just won the Pulitzer for his commentary in The New Yorker. Some of you may know he began as a columnist for Arrowsmith Press when he arrived here in 2020. Now, as I told him recently, I can't afford him. A few other thank yous are in order. Publishing is as collaborative as writing is solitary. Not every writer knows in detail what happens behind the scenes as manuscripts are transformed into this singularly powerful object. Still, I think the most potent cultural force the world has ever seen, the book. And there's probably good reason that most writers don't know and many don't want to know. I remember doing a talk at a writers' conference in Lowell a few years ago. I was speaking in my capacity as an editor, and I sort of talked a little bit about what the odds are of getting a poem published in a literary magazine and fiction stories published. And the speaker who came up after me said, if he had known what the backstory was, he would never have written. It was Tobias Wolff. So I'm glad that he kind of stayed in the dark. But behind every book does stand a team, and it's been my honor to work this past year with an extraordinary group. I believe most of them are here this afternoon. Our editorial associates, both students in the MFA program, at UMass Boston, for which I thank UMass Boston, Maya Geddes and Scott Omont, and our long-term assistant editor who's been with us for 5 years and is about to head off to do her MFA in Cornell, Lara Stitsevich. Our Catherine Parnell, meanwhile, a key figure in the Boston literary firmament, has been with the press intermittently for nearly 20 years, almost from the start. Meanwhile, the whole shebang today is overseen by our senior editor extraordinaire, Gerard, aka Jake Robertson, over there. So if I could just ask all of our folks to stand up, Scott, Maya, Lara. We're gathered here today to celebrate 3 marvelous books by 4 superb poets. One of them is in Iraq and is not able to join us today, and also 1 great translator. And we're grateful to them for instigating this occasion. The end of art is peace, wrote Seamus Heaney. But it's worth acknowledging that we've assembled here at a particularly charged moment in the Republic's history, against the background of 2 ongoing genocides in Gaza and Ukraine, with violence shadowing the subcontinent, democracy under siege almost everywhere, most pointedly here in the United States. In desperate times, however, we do not despair. This nation has been at a crossroads before. In times like this, one of the most important things we can do for ourselves is to clarify the values on behalf of which we take our stand. For myself, these were beautifully articulated by the founder of the Dada movement, Hugo Ball, who wrote, I forgot where this comes up, he posed the question, what is culture? And he answered it this way: interceding for the poorest and most humble among the people, as if from them the noblest beings and the rich plenitude of heaven are to be born. And then he asked a follow-up question: what is intelligence? He answered it this way: conscience applied to culture. If we accept Ball's definition of intelligence as conscience applied to culture, and I do, then the writers reading here today are off the charts. Really grateful to you all for the books that you gave us a chance to bring into the world. They'll be reading in alphabetical order, and each will be introduced by a member of the Arrowsmith team. Our first reader, Jennifer Jean, will be introduced by Maya Geddes. Maya.
Hello everyone, thank you. So my name is Maya Geddes, and I will be, it's a pleasure to introduce Jennifer Jean today, and her beautiful book, Where Do You Live, which was co-written with Dr. Hanaa Ahmad Jabr. So to begin, in the great tradition of epistolary poetry, Where Do You Live is a correspondence in Arabic and English written and co-translated by Iraqi poet Dr. Hanaa Ahmad Jabr and American poet Jennifer Jean. Poem by poem, exquisitely co-translated by Wadat Case and Tamra Al-Atiyah, Where Do You Live chronicles the lives of these two poets as they reach across the vast geographical and cultural distances between Mosul, Iraq, and Massachusetts. In the poem High Noon, Jennifer writes, "And once we all get used to the terrible discomfort of imperfect understanding, we'll know heaven, we'll know friendship is possible." Where Do You Live is a project courageous in the face of imperfect understandings and in translation and otherwise. It's an endeavor of creative activism and collaboration that ought to inspire us all to reach across the distances, both physical and psychological. Letters for this book project make for the perfect choice when it comes to alignment of content and form. At once intimate yet public, they offer themselves up as openings for connection. It's a thrill to read them as practice in intentional public intimacy and, dare I say, love. As Hanaa points out, the title, Where Do You Live, is metaphorical in that it's asking, where are you in life, in your head right now? How are you? Each poetic missive, like one of Baudelaire's autumn seeds, opens the door to possibility and sharing. Hanaa writes, "I will tell you my tale, Jennifer. I was a lost wave crashing into every song, but poetry extended his hands, raised me up, introduced me to myself." As Hanaa and Jennifer address one another, we come to an understanding that, as Hanaa writes, poetry is prophecy, and that we as humans are poetic vessels ourselves, carrying an accumulation of moments and experiences throughout life. It is our choice as to how to live with that accumulation. Do we say, turn away or toward? And where do you live? We practice a heartfelt turning towards. Hanaa writes, "I talked to you the other about the way each war documented its history with a hole in my voice until it became a flute." In her very first missive, Jennifer writes, "I live in the middle of creation when I can." Ultimately, I read this book as a utopic work, a gentle attempt to birth the beginning visions of a better future through the universal power of creation and art. And to share a bit of their impressive bios, Dr. Hanaa Ahmad Jabr was born in Mosul, Iraq. A prize-winning poet and short story writer, she holds a PhD of philosophy in Arabic literature. Her books include the poetry collection I Draw My Sorrow from His Collar and 2 books of criticism, The Dialectic of Poetry and Prose, Modernist Poetry, and the Poetics of the Prose Poem. Additionally, she's released a children's book, Sultan and Shanidar. Hanaa teaches at the University of Mosul. And Jennifer Jean's poetry collections include Vaz, Object Lessons, and The Fool. Her research book is Object Lesson, A Guide to Writing Poetry, and she's the editor of the forthcoming anthology, Other Paths for Sherazad, a bilingual anthology of poetry by Arab women. She's received honors from the Kenyan Review Writers Workshop, the Mass Cultural Council, and the Women's Federation for World Peace. Jennifer is an organizer for the Her Stories Collective, a faculty member at Solstice MFA, and a senior program manager at the Fine Arts Work Center. So please give a warm welcome to Jennifer.
here knows what a murmuration is? That's a lot of people. Okay, so for those that don't know, murmuration is a flock of starlings. And in the fall, generally speaking, they make this beautiful movement together in the sky. You've probably seen it. You know, they're flowing, they're going back and forth, and they're going in the same direction. They're creating a work of beauty. So it's an impossible movement in a sense, and it's lovely and inspiring. Well, there's an entire murmuration of people that midwifed this book, Where Do You Live, into being. So, and I, listening to Askold, I realized what I had written here. He was kind of already saying, but I just still want to say it. Yeah, it takes more than one person to do this. In my case, I'm working with a fabulous poet, Hanaa, who I want to thank. And I have yet to meet her, and I'm really so much looking forward to meeting her. It's going to be a meeting of hearts and souls for sure. I also want to thank Tamara, who was our first translator, and she introduced us to Wada Case, who was the translator largely for the rest of the book. And I want to extend thanks to Miled Feza, who worked tirelessly with Jake as our Arabic text copy editor, and our cover artist, Janine Mohammed, who's an Iraqi artist. And I also want to thank Her Story Is collective members and supporters, especially Amy Merrill, who's here with us, and lawyer Mark Miller, Heather Brown, Elham, Nazir Al-Zubaidi, and the HSI Iraqi members, as well as people at 4 Point Theater Channel who support Her Story Is, and my daughter Chloe and my son Luke, who's here, because they helped with a lot of promotional materials for this book, and of course my husband Sebastian, and the Arrowsmith team, Askold, Jake, Cad, Maya, everybody. I just couldn't start reading poems. I had to make, you know, reference and just show my gratitude, because that's just something that's part of this book. And I've had other books out, and I just didn't have that same sense of feeling. So the Arrowsmith family is just amazing, and one that I'm really happy to be part of. Very happy to be here in general, and happy to be with Jo-Ann Mort and Tom O'Grady, to be reading with them, and to share this peace building project with all of you. What else can achieve peace better than true friendship forged in patience and creativity? That is to say, what else can achieve peace better than love? And I'm so glad that Maya mentioned that word love, because that really is what this book is about. So what I'm going to do is read the poems in English. I do not speak Arabic. And I'm going to read my poems and Hannah's poems both. And I picked poems that, for the most part, address each other, so you can get a sense of what the book's about and of our experience, because that's also what's part of this project, is that it was an entire experience. It wasn't just solitary writing, it was an exchange. Okay, so I'll read, I'll start with Hannah's poem, but actually when I go along, I'll just say the name of the poet, even though it's me. I'm gonna say my name, full name, after the title, so you know whose voice you're hearing. My poetic biography. I will tell you a tale, Jennifer. I was a lost wave crashing into every song, but poetry extended its hands, raised me up, introduced me to myself, made of me a southward bird, migrating to an eternal dream, narrating the journey, the route, the children and vivid balloons, the time that summer burns, the shoddy feeling from a magician's show, the horror vacui stumbling upon us, the field that forgot its date harvest, the bridges going nowhere, the gift-giving seasons, giving death, pardon, a voice, maybe half a voice, in parliamentary elections. Then poetry divided the journey between us. His late nights were mine, his mournful songs, and the mornings of all the world's women, and the spun poems in search of me, poems drenched in nostalgia, the last message in every war. All this is mine, yes, mine, and for you, O poetry, I am. High Noon by Jennifer Jean. And did I tell you, Hanaa? American history is wrapped in film. We watch our gunslingers meet when the sun is directly overhead, so the gunfight is fair. So neither man is blinded by anything other than hatred, short-sightedness, ingratitude, ego. Some of us believe in this scene. Some of us believe in their dusty women crying at home. But some of us believe in the fact of a clear sky so blue, 2 bodies can bathe in sunlight, see down the center of a dirt road in a rustic hometown, see for miles into the niches and nooks of each other's faces. A miracle. We think this lack of shadow is heaven. And it's only heaven if we've nothing to hide. Let's meet here, Hanaa, on the original road of this mutual hometown with our translator, Wada. And once we all get used to the terrible discomfort of imperfect understanding, we'll know heaven. We'll know friendship is possible. Three Tales by Hanaa Ahmad Jabr. I talked to you the other about a nation consuming the dreams of lovers, mothers, and the holiday sweets of I, about the soil swallowing soldiers, turning them to mounds, new metropolises, faceless monuments, and recollections that are obedient to stabbing pain. I talked to you, the other, about nightfalls, turning the poems suspicious, the corners restless, and the light into a wound from which boundless gasps ooze. I talked to you, the other, about the way each war documented its history with a hole in my voice until it became a flute. Three Tales by Jennifer Jean. My mom tries to convince me she didn't leave me for 7 years. I'm driving through Salem. This is a dangerous game. To win, I can't play. I can't want to play. I can only grip the wheel, breathe, practice forgiveness, which means shining a light on facts, even though, as you say, Hanaa, light becomes a wound from which boundless gasps ooze. A part of my second tale is the tale you didn't tell, Hanaa. I was born on the 4th of July. We dance around this fact, but dancing is how we know each other. The third tale is that I want control when God is in control. Hanaa, if we walk Salem streets, talk and feel a warm wind, we did not tell that breeze to touch our hair, which reminds me of the time technology told me the Arabic word for hair is the Arabic word for poetry, which is a lovely mystery. Just a quick explanation about that. I asked Hanaa about that. Why did Google tell me that this word that I see on your Facebook page and all the time that I'm assuming means poetry, it means hair, and she just said that the word poetry and hair share a similar root in Arabic. So that's fascinating. So whenever I read her Facebook page, I'm seeing like the hair salon all over the place, and I'm like, oh, it just changes it. And just really quick before I read the next poem, that's how we got to know each other. We would talk on Zoom with each other. We would communicate sometimes via translator on WhatsApp. I was unfamiliar with WhatsApp before my communications with Hanaa. We would exchange as much as possible information about art and poetry, friendship, our families. She loved the fact that my daughter's a dancer. I would send her videos of my daughter dancing. She was really into that. There was so much exchange going on, but hopefully you're all getting it through the poems. Okay, Portrait by Hanaa Ahmad Jabr. There's no running from our sorrow, from his grip as he drags us into the nearest war. No running from his fingers, molding us like snowballs from an eastern region, though we vanish fast. No running from his mean greed as he devours us all like new food. No running from his rattling ideas as cold and cool he smokes our dreams going and coming. He's coming close, this necromancer, as usual. Closer, closer, and here he crafts his chapeau from our skulls, gloves from our skin. He wears the remains of our lives, declares his win while standing on our carnage. But a win over what? I don't know. Maybe our distant spark of light. Oh God, he's stolen even our sorrow. Now how do we grieve? Regarding your poem Portrait by Jennifer Jean. Possible responses include vague extended apologies for my comfort or my government, details of dystopian nightmares complete with sharp rusted metal and unbroken screams, below the desk nuclear winter fears from 7th grade, half-remembered news reports of shrapnel, both ancient and recent, silence, hope, stories about a woman swallowed by a Burmese python. She wanted to check on the pigs in her cornfield, but he found her, bit her, crushed her, consumed her. Then 3 poet friends wrote sonnets starring this woman, this python. They invited me to write one too, so I wrote How to Kill Pythons. It was full of theory and snake hatred, of blue mouthwash, lit Bic lighters, machete chops below the jawline, and how you certainly can't love them to death. Anyways, war eats love. Love's a fat lump in the belly of a beast. Family and friends run out, search, wail, find a footprint, a slipper, a torch, and then, after slicing through the scales near the bulge, a broken woman dressed for a stroll. Hanaa, I saw her unveiled, my eyes squinting between my fingers, and this is what I can do. Read your poems, write my poems, live between the two. So I'm just going to read 2 more. And just want to mention that it's very much worth hearing Hanaa read the poems in Arabic. And you can do that if you go to the Arrowsmith website. Maya interviewed Hanaa, myself, and Wada, and you can hear her not only just reading the poems in Arabic, but answering questions in depth. Also, we're going to be interviewed for, this just kind of happened, for a very popular podcast called Rattlecast on May 25th. If you go to my website, you can see the link to that. It's at 12 noon on May 25th, and you can hear Hanaa read there as well. And then the last thing I'll say, you can also hear her poems in Arabic at the Mass Poetry Festival on June 1st. I'll be reading alongside Alma Riche, who's the director of the Center for Arabic Culture in Boston. So that'll be quite an experience. But for now, I'm going to read, the last 2 poems I'm going to read are the title poems. Where Do You Live by Hanaa Ahmad Jabr. I don't know the name of the first war that birthed me. Perhaps no one recorded it. Perhaps the tigress witnessed it, alone knowing every direction, alone remembering the myths and the facts, attending its flow since forever. I live here in the north, where memory is bloody sorrowful, where I belong to the river and stand on one bank, one eye open, staring at the ruins of the old city decaying, whispering, oh God of old alleys, protect us from the next war. Here I am, watching the Shamshgate, reanimating the walls of Nineveh, the statue of Abu Taman, waving to arrivals, the bridges connecting the lungs of the city, the clouds eager for rain, unobscured by smoke, the river rushing without bodies of war to stop it, and many more sidewalks, and other things breaking news can't mention, nor rehab for PTSD, nor reports from the BBC or CNN, nor any channels. Yes, I live here, while my other eye is closed, hiding dreadful war scenes, with nothing to help me form a description, not grandmother's tales, nor children's dreams, not poetry festivals, nor literary criticism, nor horror movies, not UN reports, nor history texts. No sentence in any language could bear the weight of that terror. Here, I feel my eyes swelling with it all, carrying the archives for future generations. And here, my face swells too, my arms, my torso. Oh, I'm here, embracing myself, swelled again and rising. I think I fell upwards as usual. Now, Jennifer, you may wonder, who are you? What is your hometown? And I'll answer immediately, with one eye still closed. We are the two eyes together forever. And the last one, Where Do You Live by Jennifer Jean. I should say I live in my body, in the knowledge I was fated for, like you said, Hanaa, poetry. And even if I tried hard not to, I tell all the truth, but tell it slant. I live in these secrets spelled out for the curious. I live in Salem, with the ghosts of accused witches. I live in the San Fernando Valley in California, in my poems. I live in fear of loneliness, but my real hometown is anger at the way things are when they should be better. I've decided to move away from should. I want to say I live in peace. If we're talking about time folding into the now, the future being now, at least I live in motion along those folds sometimes when I'm talking to you, Hanaa. When I fly, I think I've always lived in midair, from Boston to Kolkata, from San Francisco to Seoul. I asked a pilot once about the hometown of a baby born mid-flight. He didn't know what to say. He paused forever. He may have been telling the truth, but slant. I'm still waiting for answers. I used to live in wasted days, staring at sunshine and trees. They were wasted on me then, but not now. I live there now in this poem. You can live forever in a poem. I live in the middle of creation when I can. It's the best way to live. Thank you so much.
Laura.
Thank you for that read, Jennifer. Right, so my name is Laura Stekowitz, or Arrowsmith Press, and I'm the assistant editor at Arrowsmith Press. Tonight I'll be introducing Jo-Ann Mort, the poet. At 69, after a 22-year hiatus from poetry, Jo-Ann Mort returns with her triumphant debut collection of poetry called Precise Chaos, which Brian Martin describes as, quote, moving with astonishing mastery between the exigencies of history and the intensities of private life. Having studied poetry at Sarah Lawrence College and New York University, she has since committed her life to journalism and social evolution. And, when necessary, revolution as a trade union activist, a political organizer, and a peace activist in the Middle East. She has reported for more than 40 years from Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories to the Chicago Tribune, the Forward newspaper, the Los Angeles Times, the Guardian, and more, and has contributed opinion pages to the Guardian as well as the New Republic magazine. Mort's research and experience have informed her poetry, which travels through space and time as we witness poems from the speaker's travels in her 30s with a now deceased partner recollections of her father's passing in a pivotal poem in this collection from which the title stemmed, originally called A Precise Chaos, Dressing for My Father's Funeral, as well as interviews at the front line. Grace Schulman refers to these poems as being, quote, of utmost urgency by an American who looks hard and renders tragedy in minute detail at first hand and with an eerie precision. Whether she is writing of a fellow passenger praying on a Brooklyn subway or of devoted worshippers in Croatia, her portraits are moving and deeply human. Mort explores difficult histories and the marks they leave, as well as alternative futures, had they not been altered by an uncontrollable past. In Mostar, the city of bridges, she notes the, quote, bullet holes through its corridors, its spine, its doorways, windows shattered into the river flowing below until the river is a congested mixture of glass and blood, like a frozen crimson stream of broken ice in the middle of summer. These bullet holes turn their slender arms into sieves that ooze out centuries of something that almost resembled civilization. Upon returning home to Brooklyn, Mort considered the daughters she will have. Quote, my daughters will be named Bella and Justice. When I am old, they will sing to me, quietly, breathlessly, above sound, above light. They will shout, they will sing, they will appear, just not in this lifetime or to me. Mort once wasn't convinced that poetry could save the world. But after the world started to change, she realized that she, as a poet, was capable of creating an opposite, positive change, and that poetry can, quote, save humanity and humanness. We see change in the opening poem of her book, The Men, in which she writes, quote, the men were larger than life. They sparked a room when they walked in, if not a revolution. They meant well. They desired great change. But life is larger than these men, and now life is where I am. Mort is a longtime resident of Park Slope, Brooklyn. Her poems have recently appeared in Plume Poetry, The Atlanta Review, The Woman's Review of Books, Upstreet, and elsewhere. By publishing her first collection in her 60s, Mort has succeeded in distilling a wealth of experience into wisdom. We have the privilege of hearing from her tonight.
I also want to thank Eskold and the entire incredible Arrowsmith team. I pinch myself every day that I'm back to my roots as a poet, and so lucky to have found this extraordinary home on this list and with this great group of people at Arrowsmith. So thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm going to start actually with the poem that Laura quoted from called The Men. It's the first poem in the book. And I just want to say, Laura and I did a podcast together, and it shocked me that she related to this poem. This is one of the older poems in the book. The poems in this book span about at least 40 years. And I really thought this was a poem stuck in time in the 1980s. And she proved me wrong. So, The Men. The men were larger than life, starting revolutions in their heads and in their classrooms, negotiating contracts, whispering into the ears of governors and presidents. The men were larger than life, so life eluded them, the quiet time, the simple sip, the innocent glance, the hearth and home. And I, too, life eluded me. The men were larger than life. They were my life, my circle, my hearth, my home. And then the revolution failed. The workers lost their jobs to China, and we all grew older. The men were larger than life. They sparked a room when they walked in, if not a revolution. They were larger. They left wives and children and me. Life was larger than these men. They meant well. They desired great change. But life is larger than these men, and now life is where I am. And this is a poem called Market Day. I want to say about this poem, it's pretty self-explanatory, but what I love about it is it started with one image of a belt that I was wearing, and it took me, thinking about the belt just took me through this trajectory of of the globe and decades, and it's really what poetry does so well. It is a sort of magical art form, and if you just let it go, if you let yourself go where the metaphor takes you and where the image takes you, you end up in places that you didn't expect, and that's what I think this poem is about. Market day. Python belt on my jeans. You bought it for me maybe 30 years ago at the market in Oaxaca, bargaining until the price was on the floor. It still fits me, wrapped around my stomach like a safety belt that holds memories close to my skin, a binding or a soft kiss each time I pull up my jeans. Doll, you called me, your Serbian accent getting thicker each year that you lived in America. Once you met me at the airport in Mexico City, handing me a canister of mace pepper spray to keep in my bag while we traveled. But instead of using it against a bandit or rapist, the cap got loose in the back pocket of my jeans while the yellow liquid seeped down my leg like the stripe on a wild animal. I can still feel the burn decades later. Our immediate need was to find me a new pair of jeans, so we shopped near the Zocalo where the stores were full of denim, but only for tiny Mexican bodies, not my tall and angled bones. The pants we bought were too short and too wide, but the belt kept them firm around me. I returned once to Mexico without you. In the market in Cuernavaca, a vendor weighed strands of sterling to sell me, looped around my neck and chest, heavy and light silver, and the hoops, costing a peso or two, threaded through my ears. You are dead, your ashes scattered over the Adriatic. I remember the cut flowers in the glass jar in your bedroom on Brach, left for us by your daughter for our return from Dubrovnik. The putt-putt of your motorboat as it crawled around the island. We docked for fresh caught smelts and hard crust bread soaked in Dalmatian wine. On market day, we would walk down the steps of your street to the dock where the produce displayed was tomatoes and green onions. It was a simpler time, even though Tito was barely dead and a civil war was bubbling from the mountains and the fields. I was young then, or at least in my 20s, and thought I had all the time in the world. Tonight, near the music near my house is live as I sit with friends you never met, eating roasted salmon and drinking wine snuck into the park in water bottles. The belt is beneath my t-shirt. I remember it only when my mind wanders from the stage, and not really in boredom, but with a sort of reflex wanting the air beside me to welcome you. This is another older poem. It's called With Allen Ginsberg in the Gymnasium. My first poetry reading was in the Overbright Gymnasium at Bucks County Community College. It was 1973. Allen Ginsberg on a sofa with his leg in a cast, the sofa on a riser near the basketball scoreboard. Peter Orlovsky behind him, a solo chorus with a lute. In between chants and singing his poems, Ginsberg welcomed his father Louis to read his poetry in rhymed verse, wound as tight as the son's verse was loose all over the page, snaking and swirling the sounds of a century. Louis wore a powder blue jacket and matching tie. Allen's stepmother Edith sat in the bleachers, clutching her purse like my Aunt Sarah used to do, as if all her earthly possessions were stored in that little black box with a fake pearl handle. I never knew her last name while she lived. Widowed, she was just Aunt Sarah. After she died, my uncle gave me her passport that he kept in a box of old photos. Census forms from 1910, 1920, and 1930 list my family from Austria, Germany, Poland, Russia, Ukraine. But what did these borders matter? There was really just one big landmass of dead Jews. On my mother's side of the family, we have only this passport from Radachov in Galicia. Aunt Sarah with thick ankles and laced-up Oxfords with raised heels, wire-rimmed glasses, housecoat, dresses. Her apartment above the store smelled like must and talcum powder. One evening, I saw Allen Ginsberg on First Avenue near St. Mark's. I was with Bogdan, who knew him from the 1950s village scene. He looked lonely and out of place, even though gentrification hadn't compressed the East Village into every town USA just yet. They nodded hello to each other, compelled by the gentle whisper of acquaintance that informs our lives as we age, while the memories of our younger selves dance on the corner without regard to anything except the steps we take to find our way home. I'll just get a sip of water. There's an arc of poems in this book about Poland. I've been there a couple of times. I've done some reporting from there. Went for search of roots and other obvious things about Poland. I spent some time in Gdansk, and while I was there, I interviewed the mayor of Gdansk, who became mayor because her predecessor had been murdered recently, and she was in a fight with the then right-wing government over the memory, the meaning of memory in Poland. It was actually during the first Trump administration. Never thought we'd say those words. And it's still a contest in Poland, literally rewriting memory and what happened and who was responsible for what. And there was a war over who would hold on to the memories of Gdansk, which is the place where World War II started. And the right-wing government at the time really wanted to own that narrative. And it's also, of course, the city where Solidarity was born, and Lech Walesa, who founded Solidarity, lives there still. So that's what this poem is about. Sunday in Gdansk. Oh, I want to say one more thing about it. It was the 30th anniversary of Solidarity when I was there, Solidarność. And there were only two places in the country celebrating this, were Warsaw with a left-wing mayor who may end up now being the new president in a few weeks of Poland, and Gdansk. The rest of the country under the then right-wing government just completely ignored the victory of Solidarity, which was pretty extraordinary to me. Sunday in Gdansk. In the Gdansk inner harbor, the boat is filled with families and couples toasting each other with pints. The town becomes only shipyards and then the open sea. A singer tests the microphone with his pointer finger. Everyone else joins in. I am a kind of lonely that is hard to feel or swallow. We pass the shipyards boats half carcassed, where Solidarity was born, converted into trendy loft living. The Solidarity Museum has signage on the glass doors at the entrance proclaiming, "Europe begins here." A light show about a people's revolution reflects off the walls along the quay as families enjoy ice cream cones. Lech Walesa is in his apartment nearby, half revered and half reviled. In Westerplatte, on the tiny beach next to the parking lot, shirtless truck drivers stand near their rigs, their shorts damp with the smell of land that sits awkwardly between east and west. Here is a French fries stand where the world once broke apart. Whoever visits history gets to write it. There are also an arc of poems in this book about Israel, about the occupied Palestinian areas, and about the occupation, and about what I would say the humanity of both peoples. I spend a lot of time over there. I'm about to go back again for most of the summer. And I have relationships on both sides of the non-border, as I put it. And what I hope these poems do is really show not only the issues that are political issues that need to be resolved desperately, but also the humanity on both sides. And this is a poem that I think speaks to the sort of the craziness of the situation. Crazy is way too neutral a word, but it's about Jerusalem. West Jerusalem is mostly Jewish. East Jerusalem, which was captured by Israel after '67, is primarily Palestinian. And the people in East Jerusalem, really their cultural relationships are in toward Ramallah and the West Bank and toward Jordan. And there's a time of year where daylight savings time is announced. It happens in Israel, and it's a different time for a few days than the Jordanian calendar. And as a sort of, I think, a sort of protest, I have no idea whether it's true or not, but it made for a good poem. The Palestinian side doesn't change their clocks until for a few days. So there's literally a time gap of a day or so where the city of Jerusalem has two different time zones. The other thing to explain here is I mentioned 3 places that are checkpoints between Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, their military checkpoints, Kalandia, Hizmah, and the DCL. Oh, one other thing. This is a poem reflecting on the war in Syria, which seems so long ago. And I mention in here, and ISIS, again, something we don't really talk about anymore. I mentioned the poet Adonis, who is still a very, probably the best known living, certainly Syrian poet, maybe Arab poet. He lives in exile in Paris. And Mahmoud Darwish, the Palestinian national poet. They're both mentioned in here. Time zones. 1. My eyes are asking me to stop writing, you tell me. It's 3 a.m. your time. Here in Brooklyn, I am flipping through your messages on my iPhone, half in English, half in Arabic, which I don't understand. We talk ISIS, Adonis, and the utility of Google Translate. 2. On a dark January day in Jerusalem, I sip red wine, cupping the glass in memory of Darwish and his studious intensity toward the red liquid. Your whiskey glass sits in a puddle of faint water on the table near my computer. Christian pilgrims hug their teacups close where they sit behind us. Arabic is good for speaking between the lines. 3. Adonis reads his poems about Jerusalem at the French Cultural Center on 5th Avenue, where spring pours in from the wide windows. In art, there is no east and west, he quips. Religion is an answer and poetry is a question. But I can't help leaving the reading with a question. How did Syria not seep into that precious room with the wooden beams and the delicate hanging light fixtures? Who are we, poets and fans, to push the essence of the war away from our faces, out of our minds, even for an hour as we praise metaphor over answers? Even asking a question is enough, an important beginning, but not to ask to stay silent. That too is a type of metaphor or a simile. Silence is like the breath before death, the gasp unheard. 4. There is that whisper of days when Jerusalem becomes 2 time zones and sunset happens twice. You can run from west to east and add an hour to your life for just 2 days a year when East Jerusalemites join their clock hands to the people on the other side of Kalandia, Hizmah, the DCL, and lag a day behind official Israel's daylight savings shift. A silent rebellion that separates neighborhoods or something else. The warm moon smiles down on the silly people who are unable to synchronize the hours as the mash of wild rosemary and chickweed aim to stretch toward daylight. I'm gonna read two more poems. These are sort of odd bookends, these poems. One is about my first trip to Paris, which I took 40 some years when I was in the 1980s sometime, early 1980s. And then the other is the poem that was the last poem to make it into the book. It's my most recent poem about a recent trip to Paris. Adornment. On my first trip to Paris, I bought a multicolored scarf, violet with blueberries, for my mother, who left it on a bar stool at the Bluebell Inn. She was there to pick up men. I gave her the violet and blueberry scarf, and she wore it once or twice perhaps. She went to pick up men and left it on a bar stool, where she was giggling with her girlfriends. She wore it once or twice, perhaps, as she dressed in outfits distinct from her past, on a bar stool, giggling with her girlfriends. She tried to be the carefree widow. I bought her a scarf on my first trip to Paris. It's that scarf I see as she tucks her napkin in her sweater to soak up the tomato sauce across from me in the restaurant. Her once high cheekbones are sagging as she sits back in her chair. To where did the inches disappear? I see her now in me as I stare in the mirror. She wore it once or twice perhaps, and all the other things she gave me, a baguette or suede jacket now more than 50 years old. She was so beautiful, but when I look into the mirror, I see her sagging cheekbones and I feel inches fly from beneath my feet. Maybe the mirror lies, memories too. I try to contain the love as I grasp a diamond locket around my neck. From her mother to mine to me, they are dead, and I adorn myself with these bits of memory. I gave her the violet and blueberry scarf and remember it as if it were yesterday. And this last poem, little bit of explanation. I mention in here someone named Chevènement. Jean-Pierre Chevènement was a minister in the Mitterrand socialist government, and also Solferino, which is a street in the 7th arrondissement, but it also was the headquarters for the Socialist Party when there were socialists running the government, Mitterrand and Hollande. And after they lost, they had to move out to the suburbs, and the building is now only in everybody's memory of bringing socialist government back into office in Paris, then and now. We bought me black snow boots from a market vendor in the 5th. I insisted on moving from our hotel with a toilet in the hallway. You photographed me shivering outside the Pantheon, my scarf wrapped tightly like a blanket. I was so young, I couldn't imagine what 60 would look like, or 70, or... Now, in the store windows, my face is long, my eyes have pockets. You are a shadow behind me, the broad girth of your imaginary body, your thick white hair, sunglasses. Oh God, I can't remember the color of your eyes. But I feel your stubborn or steady presence along the sidewalk, crossing the street, in my hotel room, at a bar, everywhere, everywhere. There were socialists back then. You left me alone to meet Chevènement for lunch. Now, Solferino is mannerless. A fancy dress shop sits near the old party headquarters. We walk along the Seine. I try to hide our conversation, covering my mouth, so that no one sees me talking to myself, to you, to our years.
Hello, everybody. My name is Scott Ormond. I'm an intern with Arrowsmith, so I have the great privilege and pleasure of introducing our final reader today, Thomas O'Grady, who's going to be reading from his extraordinary new collection, Coming Ashore. And on the back, Mark Strand has noted the seeming effortlessness of Thomas's poems, how they strike a perfect balance between straightforwardness and elegance. And he describes them as clean and contained. And this is all perfectly true, but I think Mark Strand would also agree that they don't simply, sorry, I'm going to need my glasses. They're not simply polished surfaces that reflect the world with a quiet grace. The visions in here blaze with a kind of epiphanic or hypnagogic clarity. And the title, Coming Ashore, itself suggests that being on the verge of entering a new element, always standing at the threshold of a transition. And the title poem itself, which I understand Thomas is probably going to read, it's in response to this etching on the cover. And within the poem, Thomas evokes our former and forever selves, as well as a youthful eagerness within that's always poised to leap ashore. So for me, amidst the many things this collection does with its beautiful evocations of nature and music and memories, and it struck me as being a profound yet subtle meditation on the nature of time, not just time's passing, but the time's strange suspended eternities. So speaking of blazing, in one of the earlier selected poems we have in this collection, called Controlled Burn, we're placed within a summer classroom where students are dazed and dulled by the dusty white noise squeak of chalk. And then they're suddenly captivated by a scene that's happening outside through a window where they can see a crew of firemen. They're managing some vegetation. They're performing the controlled burn of the title. And after the wonderful descriptions, the poem closes with these lines. We had learned already what happens next. A night or two of drenching rain and, by the book, a scorched wasteland sprouts green shoots of life. The turning world will spawn its own rebirth. Now, whether that book and whether exactly what that book refers to and when they had learned already these things, whether we're talking about classroom textbooks or some Platonic realm of the innate wisdom of nature or the soul, I think the lesson still holds that the world that turns is one that rebirths itself again and again. And in addition to this radiant new work, Coming Ashore, Thomas O'Grady is the author of two other collections, What Really Matters from 2000 and Delivering the News from 2019. He taught for many years at UMass Boston, where he was a director of Irish Studies from 1984 to 2019. And he now serves as scholar in residence at St. Mary's College in Indiana. And if you can't find him in South Bend, he might be in his bunkhouse in Rhode Island or at his beloved home where he was born and raised in Prince Edward Island, Canada. So please join me in welcoming Thomas O'Grady.
Half the people here are related to me. The rest might as well be. Thank you, Scott, for that warm introduction. Scott and I had a great conversation. I don't even know what platform. It was a YouTube? Zoom. It was via Zoom. I retired before I had to learn Zoom, so I don't even know how Zoom works, except I do it sometimes. But we had a great conversation, and I really appreciate Scott's careful reading of the poems and appreciation of the poems as poems, because that's how I read poems myself. It's just very carefully, very attentively. I'm going to start with the title poem, as Scott alluded to. On Prince Edward Island, there's a card game that we all love called 45s. And if you play 45s, there are little slogans that, or little sayings that people have in the midst of the game. One of them is, come big or stay at home. So I'm going to come big with the title poem, and then we'll move on from there. But the title poem, as Scott mentioned, is an engagement with the cover image. It's a remarkable etching by a remarkable artist named David Blackwood, a Newfoundland artist. If you know him, you may know him by way of, he did the cover for Annie Proulx's The Shipping News, but he's also one of Canada's most revered and celebrated artists. My wife Katie and I discovered his work about 30 years ago when we couldn't afford any of his etchings, and as we became more affluent, the prices went up. But finally, a couple of years ago, I actually bought a copy of this, a signed limited edition copy of this image, just because we needed to have a Blackwood on our wall. And when we hung it on the wall, within minutes, I was writing the title poem, it just kind of came in one motion. So I'm going to start with that. Coming ashore after an etching by David Blackwood. We age, and like the rower in that sea bob dory, his oars locked in, his broad back arched like a sail or a bow, strung taut against the task at hand. We chance an over-the-shoulder glance at making land that lies ahead. Then turn and face the stern again, where, strain as we might, stroke after leaden dripping stroke, our former and forever selves sit tight, their grip on the gunwales like anchors snagged in the rippling wake of the past. How that lad in the prow ignores the darkening deep, so young, so sure, so ready to leap ashore. When I was putting together this collection of selected poems from my first two books, and then the new poems, when I got it all put together and started looking at it, I realized that there are themes and motifs that run through, time and place being two of them. But I also realized that, as the title poem suggests, also innocence and experience that take place in time and place. And so I'm going to read a few poems that are going to touch on those in various ways. That poem, obviously, Coming Ashore, is what is known in poetic circles as an ekphrastic poem. It engages with an artistic image. It takes the visual and translates it into the verbal. And the next poem I'm going to read is also an ekphrastic poem, but it works with or responds to a couple of photographs, or actually a series of photographs. It's called Weight of the World, and it's a poem that I wrote in March of 2022 in response to a sequence of photos in the Washington Post by a remarkable photographer named Solomon George. And Osgold, as everybody knows, has great deep ties with Ukraine. And Solomon George was taking photographs of a train station in Odessa. So I want to acknowledge Osgold's important role in keeping Ukraine publicly in the eye. But I also want to read this poem for my youngest daughter, Siobhan, who is here today, which is amazing. Siobhan, as many of you know, is the Washington Post bureau chief in Ukraine, and has been in Ukraine for almost the entire war, in and out for a little while, and now permanently fixed in Ukraine. There's a poem later in the book that is dedicated to her and her husband, an epithalamium, but it's too long to read. So
I'm the favorite.
So I'm just going to read this one. So it's an ekphrastic poem, Washington Post. Look up Solomon George, March 2022, and you'll see the photos. It's also set in South Bend, Indiana, where Katie and I moved 5 years ago. never in our wildest dreams were we living in South Bend, Indiana, but we do. And we live above a river, and so that's the setting of it. The heavy heart of winter, and from our window perched by the river's edge, we glimpse the steady glow, the silent shudder and lurch of a far-off train on sturdy trestled tracks, eye-high with the city's low-rise roofs. Boxcar, gondola, hopper. Freight of the world, a whistle blows, an engine heaves, and a world away where roofs cave in beneath the weight of war. A man on a platform turns to brush back tears. A woman wipes a hazy pain. A railway carriage judders and sways, then disappears. So I have 3 daughters, and they're all here. So I'm going to, and each of them has a poem dedicated to them in the book, as well as the overall dedication of the book. So I'm going to read the other 2 poems that are dedicated to our daughters. So this next one, it's a short poem. It's set on Elephant Rock Beach in Westport, Massachusetts. We have a summer home, as Scott alluded to, a boat hole down in Rhode Island. It's a former rum runner's bunkhouse, which is pretty cool, interesting history to it. But every day that I'm there, I try to walk on Elephant Rock Beach first thing in the morning and then again in the evening. And this incident that's described here took place on Boxing Day, December 26th, 2 years ago. And this is for Katrina. And when I shared this poem with Katie and the girls, Katrina said, "I was there!" And so suddenly it became her poem, I guess. So it's a short poem. But it's also a poem that whenever I walk on the beach, I'm reminded of the beaches of Prince Edward Island, and always comparing, especially with the South Shore of Prince Edward Island where I grew up. And so that is embedded in the poem as well. So Boxing Day. We walk the strand collecting stones. At turning tide, the surf rears up and shakes its light-flecked mane. A flight of swans disturbs the sky. They strain, their mighty wings the thudding thrum of hoofs pummeling sandy loam. White stallions galloping neck and neck, 3 wide, stretching for home. So Mary Oliver has a line that I love, and it's kind of a throwaway line in a poem where she says, "A poem should always have birds in it." So I got the birds in, and a year or so ago I was being interviewed, and someone knew I loved that line and said, "What do you think of that?" And I said, "Well, if not birds, then cats." And I thought cats and horses. So this had both birds and horses alluded to. But the next one is about horses. And this is for our eldest daughter, Maria O'Grady. This is set at our home in Rhode Island. And Maria and Katrina and Siobhan have been staying with us for the last several nights down there. And Maria is in the room with a view of horses, as we call it, because there's a meadow across the lane from us, and there's a riding stable down below us, and the owner of the riding stable a number of times during the year brings her horses up and they graze in that meadow. And we also have a pool. And as I said to someone the other day, the only thing better than having a pool is having a neighbor with a pool. And likewise, I'd say for horses, the only thing better than having a horse is having a neighbor with a horse, because you get to enjoy the beauty of it without having to have all the care that's involved with it. So this poem is called Longing, and Maria has lived all over the world, in Senegal, in Cameroon, not Cameroon, Senegal, Thailand, South Africa, and now she lives in Somerville. So the poem is kind of about, we're always searching for something in that passage of time in our lives. So it's called Longing. A room with a view of horses. Who could want more? 2 chestnut fillies, a golden palomino magnificent as light, and Bailey, that ghostly white mare, who one night clip-clopped down our gravel path like an apparition stepped out of a book or a dream. This morning in the meadow across the lane, they crowd and nudge the 6-barred metal gate, as if longing en masse for another riderless moonlit ride. They nuzzle each other and nicker. They bother the fence and wedge their noble heads between the rails. They crunch and munch the greener grass in reach on the other side. So that is actually a prose poem. It abandons line breaks and predictable rhyme and so on. And I started writing prose poems just occasionally when they arrived to me as prose poems 2 years ago. And I've taken quite a liking to them because they do give you a little bit more flexibility than working with a fixed form, and allow you to have a kind of a narrative dimension to it in a more accessible way. So one prose poem deserves another prose poem, so I wrote another prose poem. I'm using my boarding pass here for my notes. It took us a long time to get here on Wednesday from South Bend, Indiana. We had a canceled flight, then we had a delayed flight, and then we got rerouted through Philadelphia, and we ended up in Providence finally. So that's but this poem is set in South Bend, Indiana. I think most of you will recognize the figure who is referenced in the poem. If not, I'll say at the end who it is. But the poem is called Dizzying. And this is obviously, I think, a poem that is about innocence and experience, and what happens in time to us in our perspective on the world. So Dizzying. That night we heard him take flight in the conference room of a downtown South Bend hotel. Trumpet bell bent up toward the stars, a gleaming exotic bloom. We held our breath, his high wire acrobatic notes, scaling the rolled back partition walls like searching beams of light. Pouched cheeks pushing and pitching those flaring flurries beyond the soundproof drop ceiling tiles. How he climbed and climbed those ladder rungs of ledger lines inside his head, a death-defying flying trapeze of arpeggiated style, until, did he make his Irish exit through the roof? The band played on and on. We were young in the spring of '84. We waited and waited, expecting more. So it was Dizzy Gillespie, legendary trumpeter with his bent bell. And we thought, we're seeing Dizzy Gillespie. And we did for about 25 minutes. And then all of a sudden he wasn't there. But the band kept on playing and we kept on waiting. And then finally, the evening was over. That's what happened. I actually read that poem recently at a little gathering of friends out in South Bend. And I was amazed that nobody there knew that Dizzy Gillespie had actually played in South Bend, and these were South Bend lifers, so we felt kind of special about that. So that theme or that motif of innocence and experience and aging and time runs throughout the volume. It adds, I think, a little bit of heaviness at times to the poems. It's an invitation to kind of contemplate that. But with having a poem titled Weight of the World, I also have to make my own pitch that not every poem has to carry the weight of the world. So I'm going to read another poem that also engages with that aging, but in a different way. And this is a blank verse sonnet. Most of you had sonnets beat into you in high school, if not afterwards. 14 lines, particular rhyme scheme, iambic pentameter, and so on. A blank verse sonnet has 14 lines, particular rhythmic pattern, but no set rhyme scheme. Some people call it an American sonnet, but I'm from Prince Edward Island. I love the story of Samuel Beckett once being asked in French, Monsieur Beckett, vous êtes anglais? And he said, au contraire. No, elbows up, I'm Canadian. So this is a Canadian, I guess this is a Canadian sonnet under those terms. So I'll claim it. But it's called The Reckoning, which is a weighty title. But I guess I had to write this poem because only one time I went to my local barber shop in Milton, where we lived, and the barber on that occasion, her name was Barbara. How can you not write a poem about a barber named Barbara? And it took me a long time to write it, actually, but what I described in the poem really happened, the conversation, et cetera, et cetera. And I changed the name to Barbara Ann just for rhythmic purposes. So this is The Reckoning. A shrug, a long once over twice from nape to crown, a drawn out stretching yawn, a frown. That day I begged my barber, Barbara Ann, to trim a gray maned decade from my life. To please the wife, I hastened to explain, who swore last night she wed a younger man. Then sit, her fingers snapped, and tapped the throne, and draped me in a cape from throat to lap. Then comb and buzzing clippers, razor, shears, a stepping back and forth, a tuneless hum, a shaggy carpet spreading thick as years, the feathery fall of silver temple time. The brush off next, a mint-tipped sigh. I tried. The glinting mirror brought us eye to eye. Yeah, you get old. But I never had a gray hair on my head until I had daughters. and it got grayer and grayer as they became teenagers. So, is that just coincidence? I don't know. I'm going to read two more poems, and these are both love poems. When I did a launch of my second book, Living the News, I was giving a reading to a big crowd up in Prince Edward Island, and I said, I write a lot of love poems. Most of them are for my wife. And everybody gasped, and then I gasped, because that's who you're supposed to write the love poems for. So I recently came upon a quotation from from a poet, I can't remember who it was now, who said, poets who write love poems are in love with love. They're not in love necessarily with a person. They're in love with love. But these are love poems that I've written for my wife. So this one is also a blank verse sonnet, or Canadian sonnet, if you will. I like to show off my linguistic prowess, so I use my German in this poem. And as I don't know, I have very little German beyond a couple of words that Joyce uses in Ulysses, Nacheinander and Nebeneinander. But for this poem, I come up with more German than that. So it's another ekphrastic poem as well. It's a poem, the poem that precedes it in the book is called At the Albertina in Vienna. And we visited Vienna a couple of years ago and just loved the Albertina Museum in Vienna and loved the collection and marvelous painters, some of whom I hadn't heard of, but certainly many images of painters that we did know, but we hadn't never seen before. And one of them was a German expressionist named Ernst Ludwig Kirchner. And I really liked his paintings, and so I decided to do a little bit more exploring. And I found a particular painting by him that was not in the Albertina, and I said, wow, that painting really speaks to me. So I better write a poem about it. And I think I think this was a poem, I think was for your birthday last year?
You give me so many poems.
Which
occasion? Yes, I think so.
Yeah, I think it was, yeah, because I think it was the final poem that made it into the book. Yeah, she gets 4 poems a year. Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, our anniversary, and her birthday. So she gets at least 4 poems a year. So we'll say this was the birthday poem. And so the title of it is in German. So excuse my Prince Edward Island accent, speaking German, but it is Die Mädchen meiner Trauma. If it's translated in the poem, you'll recognize what it means just by the rhythms of it. So it's after Kirchner. Forgive me, love. That stylish, broad-brimmed hat may be the topper, Parisian haute couture. But how could I, improper as it seems, not stop and stare when there she stood in flesh and blood and light of day, just so picture perfect, a figure fit for a boudoir wall. And yes, I must admit, the girl of my dreams, with all her precious goods on rare display. I know you know I swore, in heart and head, to sip no crimson lips but yours. But oh, the promise that those ruby slippers spoke. Mein Herr, you're not in Kansas anymore. And yet, by God, I do declare, had she been you instead? And then, mein Schatz, I woke. Okay. I don't know if I'm in trouble or not. I will find out. So I'm going to close with one more love poem. And this is a poem that I really love. It came from 2 different places that join in the middle or come together in a kind of a pivot point marked in the middle of the poem. There's a little key word or key concept in the poem, and I have no idea how I know certain things, but one of the things that I know is that back in the olden days, that the mechanism that connected railway cars was known as a knuckle. And I think it was because of the way that it kind of fastened over and latched. Now I think there's some sort of hydraulic connection. It's a completely different thing. But I love that idea of the knuckle. This is another poem that starts out in the Midwest, where we now live, temporarily. When we moved out there, I sent a big note out to our family and friends, and I concluded by saying, I don't want to die in Indiana. And my mother-in-law, my wife's mother, my mother-in-law, are those the same thing? I understand. Immediately wrote to me and said, Niles, Michigan is only 9 miles away. So anyway, every time I cross the border, it's like, oh no. But this poem is called Boxcars. So I have a little train obsession, among other things. But it's called Boxcars, and that word knuckle comes into play. Everywhere, it seems, in the middle of nowhere, these Midwestern plains spread in all directions, like a good long life lived out but not done yet. They sit, in my mind, always in twos, and sidetracks buried in autumnal stubble and husks, slowed to a stop, but stubbornly even slower to rust to dust. Their sliding doors slid wide to frame the world just as far as the mortal eye can see. And farther still, to a café à Paris, au chien qui fume, where once I watched from across the room another knuckly coupling, a gnarly knot of fingers, swollen, arthritic, thick as thumbs, coming to tabletop grips while coffee's cooled and rain rose as steam from sodden layers of matted wool. Hands locked in tandem, the present holding to the past. How hard to make love last. So we were celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary 15 days from now. We are celebrating it not in Paris, but in the Paris of Tennessee, Nashville. So there you go. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all for being here. I won't talk long because my 4 and 6-year-old, Lily and Jonah, have been very good listeners, and as you all have been as well. Just want to thank the poets. It's been a pleasure working with you on creating these books. Thank you, Osgold, once again, and the whole team. We are selling the books in the back of the room, and we take cards. So please, if you're interested in purchasing any of these books or supporting us by purchasing some past Arrowsmith titles, those are all back there where Laura is standing. Again, this is something that we create together, and books are just kind of dead objects on the shelf until they're activated by all of you. So thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting Arrowsmith Press, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.